Hey there, you're listening to Delve, the official thought leadership podcast of the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University, where we want to change how you think about management. So my name is Eric DeCare, and today we're going to talk about why peer learning is essential to managing during times of high uncertainty.
You need to be able to rely on your peers sometimes to learn and to get signals and to improve.
Learning has to be grounded in real, tangible events, not abstractions, not reports, not generalities, not statistics, but specific experiences.
So that was Henry Mintzberg, a renowned scholar and professor of management and organization here at McGill University, and Hanieh Mohammadi, one of his PhD students. So Hanieh has been doing a lot of interesting work helping managers stay agile in the face of uncertainty. And these days, that feels more important than ever. Whether we're dealing with reactionary world leaders or rapidly changing technology, the conditions of our work change every day, and there isn't always a guidebook on how to respond. So that's why Hanieh, building on some of Henry's previous work, developed a learning module to teach managers how to learn on the fly, even when it's not clear what the path forward should be. So in this conversation, we talk about the importance of leaning on your peers, working within and around the organizational structures that you have, and why, in some cases, doing something is better than doing nothing, even if you're not sure what the outcome is going to be. So McGill Delve is a free resource for managers who are looking to stay sharp and to challenge how they think about management. So if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. So all right, let's delve into it. All right, I am here with Hanieh Mohammadi, PhD candidate in organization and strategy, and the great Henry Mintzberg, renowned scholar and professor of management and organization, also here at McGill. Hanieh, welcome to the podcast for the first time, and Henry, I think you've been on the show a couple times, so I'm very excited you're both here because Hanieh, you've been working on something very interesting. So you've been developing this self-learning module for managers, and I don't know, I personally found it interesting because it's kind of focused on this idea of adapting to uncertainty and how do you learn when you're living through a situation that no one has really lived through before. So I think about this a lot in terms of the current context that we're living in with in terms of world leaders and just cutting edge technologies like AI, just like kind of all keeping us on our toes. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about what the module is, what kind of things is it covering, and what are your thoughts? Like, how do we stay sharp during this kind of time? Because I think this is a question that a lot of people are going to be asking themselves these days.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric, for having me here. So learning from Henry, like I'm coming from the same school of thought, basically. We always think business schools because people are uncomfortable when we talk about self-learning. But the reality is situations always change, especially right now with all these disruptions that are happening around the world. So more than ever, we need to be able to self-reflect and self-learn actually as a manager. But most business schools basically feed us what we are most comfortable with, which is like do this metrics or this calculation, have this number in front of you. But the reality is we always are in those quick decisions that we never get the chance to actually implement those things. So this module is basically based on, it's not just about managers to self-reflect and respond to the environment. It's about also the whole system that managers work with. So how you can learn as a system as you go and make those quick decisions and quick responses. That's basically the essence of the thinking and the essence behind the module with coaching ourselves.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So yeah, you're talking about systems, but so I don't know, like Henry, through your work, like when you think about leaders and facing uncertainty, like how do people usually deal with it when they approach a problem that is new and that they haven't encountered before?
Well, I used to make fun about people who wrote, "We live in times of great change." We never live in times of absolute stability. There are always things changing, no matter what. And we never or rarely live in times of true, total uncertainty because that's anarchy and we can't do anything. It's completely impossible. It's everybody for themselves. But in normal times, some things are changing and others aren't. Managers, by definition, deal with what everybody else can't handle. I mean, they have things they have to do to connect to boards and connect to outside people and build culture and all that stuff that they do normally. But the buck stops there. In other words, when managers get what other people can handle. So they're always dealing with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like I feel like you both alluded to like the role of a leader in this kind of environment, and I don't know, like you had mentioned the network approach or like the systems approach and the system of connections, Hanieh. So I'm just curious if you can talk about that a bit more.
We talk about leaders and we talk about the managers, but the reality is if the people around that person doesn't understand and doesn't respond to what's being unfolded, you cannot change anything. So look at democracies. So it's not just about who is on top and what is the structure. It's also about how much understanding the society has about those systems and those democracies. So Trump right now is not being like, it didn't come from outside of the earth. Somebody voted for Trump. So there is a systemic, basically, issue. So when we talk about leadership and management, we should talk about also how the manager interaction is with the system. You need to be able to rely on your peers sometimes to learn and to get signals and to improve. So. Are you able in the organizations to hook your work to another person and then put yourself at risk to hold yourself accountable with your peers? It's a little bit tricky because of the politics of organizations, of society, but unless you are able to do that, this system cannot learn as a whole. So regardless of however experience that you have, there is someone who sees the system differently and then have different experiences, and you may learn from that.
So if you walk into one of our classrooms, you're not going to see a tiered classroom with people speaking individually. You're going to see experienced managers, typically 10 years or more, sitting at round tables, sharing with each other what they can make of what we introduce. So if I introduce the idea that strategy is not really planning, it's really learning and management, and strategies evolve, they emerge from experience, and then we turn it over to the tables, half the time over to the managers, and they kind of share their experience. So this is peer learning. In this case, it could be with peers you work with regularly. You may have a table of people from your own organization, or you may be mixed. You might have a bunch of bankers sitting together who are from different banks, or you might have people completely mixed sitting together from an NGO and a bank and a chemical company and a hospital and whatever. But it's still peer learning. They're still sharing their experience with each other and learning from that in terms of the theory we introduce.
Yeah, there's a lot of humility in there that has to happen. Like as a leader, you have to be humble enough to step back.
It's interesting because you're using the word leader, and leader, the way it's portrayed these days, is the antithesis of humility. Leadership is a kind of chest-pounding, I am the leader sort of thing. That's why I've never been a big fan of leadership, or at least the way Hanieh was portraying it earlier. Leadership and management are two sides of the same coin. Managers have to lead in the sense of interpersonally and team building and culture building. And leaders have to manage, or they don't know what's going on. And so those things are together. And the humility comes from the management side. It comes not from being gawked at as our hero. It's from sort of appearing in the factory and having a look at what's really going on, or shopping in the stores where your product is being sold to find out how customers are reacting to it firsthand. And that's not micromanaging. That's engagement.
Exactly. As a person, you hold an authority position, but leadership is something that being exercised, and it can be exercised from all the level of authorities. You don't need to be a manager to exercise leadership. So putting a label as a leader on someone and then expecting these great promises actually put put that person in a dangerous position, because then we are setting those people in a path that it's hard to admit that they made a mistake. And then the later they admit that they made a mistake, the more difficult resolving that situation becomes.
So, I mean, when you talk about peer learning, like it sounds like that can take many forms. Like I think about governments that encounter a new issue and they like start calling on stakeholders to learn about a problem. Like, I don't know if that counts, like forming committees, expert committees on certain policy issues. I guess maybe you could call on your own network. Like if you have a mentor, like that, you know, you can call for questions of it. But I don't know, like, am I getting that right?
Whenever you get people together, if you managing that way, namely opening things up to their ideas and brainstorming in a way, then it's peer learning. Doesn't have to be in a classroom officially. Executive committees should be engaging in peer learning beyond sort of, pat schedules of item 1, item 2, item 3. These things should be peer learning. On the other hand, if you have a bunch of executives peer learning about what's going on in the factory and nobody has been in the factory, or in a hospital and nobody's been in an operating room or an ER emergency room, then you don't get that kind of creative learning. It's got to be grounded. I think that's a key word for me. Learning has to be grounded in real, tangible events, not abstractions, not reports, not generalities, not statistics, but specific experiences.
And also, like, building on what Henry was saying and actually contrasting what you mentioned, we often get stuck into a structure. So we talk about, okay, let's form a committee. And then by the time that you form that committee, because it's a bureaucratic organization, so it takes so long and it brings so many paperwork and stuff. So you don't need necessarily to have a structure to have that peer learning experience. One important part of it is this informal information sharing channels that already exist. Like you have someone in that other organization that you can call on, and then it's very important because often you don't get to build that structure. Yeah, in our classrooms we structure that, but often in a job you don't get to do that. So then informal sharing and informal channels that you have is as important as that structure, and we underestimate it. We don't underemphasize it. You don't need, because sometimes I talk about, okay, let's do innovation in these silo organizations. I have another work actually that you covered in Dell. So we think that, how I'm going to bring these people together, how I'm going to overcome that bureaucracy. You don't need to. So you need to just think differently in terms of how you learn.
Yeah, and I guess that comes back to something that I think you were getting at in your module. Like you talk a lot about agility. Can you talk a bit more about that? Like, what do you mean by agility? What does that look like?
So I want to shift that mindset that you need to be in a certain structure or certain environment. You need to be a cool tech startup with a flat organization to get to innovate or to get to be agile or have more innovative decisions. You can be in any sort of structure and then still be agile and take sound decisions and quick decisions. So that was the essence of the module. I want to convey to people that there are things that you can do as a manager without having the coding like a perfect structure for that.
Yeah, so it sounds to me it's like, so agility, it's about reframing things quickly. It's about adopting new knowledge, incorporating it and acting on it.
Getting comfortable with not knowing, basically letting go of control to some extent, because agility means you don't have control over everything.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, exactly. Because I think a lot about that human element, that human intuition, that gut feeling. And in times of uncertainty, like you can process as much information as you want. You can listen to as many people as you can, but at some point the deadline rolls around and you'll have to make a move. But how do you know when it's time to stop consulting and when it's time to do something?
In fact, you might want to do something before you start consulting, because sometimes if you're talking about real change and you don't know what the heck is going on, you may have no choice but to try something, do something, and maybe not too dangerous something, and see what comes, see what the result is, and if it works, you do more of it, and if it doesn't work, you do less of it. But let me say a word about intuition. I have a kind of different view of intuition. I think intuition is when you know for sure. And it was a hunch is not intuition. And dreaming that the person who's running for public office will win because you're desperate for that person to want to win is not intuition. Intuition does not function in the face of bias. Okay. Intuition is when you know for sure, you just don't know why. You don't know why it's going to happen, and you don't know why you know. And the other thing about intuition is it's not possible to have intuition about things you don't experience. I can't have any intuitions about walking on the moon. Okay. But I can have intuition about how I deal with a particular student or whatever, because I have lots of experience. The other word I think missing is judgment. If you look in a dictionary, you'll see it's still there. You'd never know by what goes on in some executive offices where judgment is just completely lost. I remember saying that, we need managers who have good judgment. And one MBA student said, well, how do you measure that? And I say, you don't measure it, you judge it. And how do you judge it? Well, you have people whose judgment you trust, people who have a record of having good judgment.
Actually, on what you said, Henry, they need to do first and then see how it goes. People actually exactly the module that I wrote is about that. So you don't go and see how I should decide, because often actually you decide and then you should basically see the result of that decision and adjust as you go. So all those elements that we talked about, like get your peers in the loop of that decision. So for example, if you have a fellow manager, other people in your department, so they observe also what is unfolding, and they see things, they can signal, they bring this human, they have different judgments, they signal you, hey, I see that, or I see the other thing. So they give you a lot of basically signal about the decision that you already made, so you can reflect and you can adjust. The other thing is those informal things, like for example, if you have like a hunch, you call your friend or you call your other manager, you say, hey.
Call somebody with good intuition.
You call somebody with good intuition, exactly. That is that informal information sharing that we talked about. So, what do you think about this? Should I go with it? I have like 1 hour to decide, and then you get something. And then the other thing is giving people that identity, when the talk that I said at the beginning. So that also brings another level of judgment and intuition into the system. So sometimes the person that you do not expect, oh, don't do that because I see that this is happening. If you shut that voice down, you don't get to do those corrective things. So these elements are the tools that you have to self-correct or reflect ongoing. It's like not measuring what to decide, is you do and then you self-correct.
When I talk about decision making, I tend to distinguish thinking first, seeing first, and doing first. If you read any book or almost any book or anything on decision making, it's all about thinking first. Get all your information, lay out the facts, generate your alternatives, evaluate your alternatives, select the best one, and so on and so forth. Well, whoever picked a mate that way? Okay, can you imagine picking a mate that way? If it's a male, you list all the possible females, you list what you're looking for, you assess her against each of these criteria, you add up the numbers, and you announce who won. By this time, she's probably married and has 3 kids. Commonly, in finding a mate, you turn the corner and there she is, or there he is, and it's we call it love at first sight. There's no analysis, there's no thinking, it's all seeing. It's seeing first. My father called my grandmother from New York and said, today I met the woman I'm going to marry. There wasn't much analysis in there. Okay, it was a seeing first kind of thing. But sometimes you seeing first isn't working because you're not seeing what you want. Thinking first isn't working because things are really chaotic. And so you engage in doing first. When it comes to selecting a mate, I'll leave it to your imagination. But, you live together and find out if you can function. And if you can, you live together longer. Eventually, it works. So seeing first, thinking first, doing first. We need a lot more seeing first and doing first.
Dating advice and management advice from Henry Mintzberg. Yeah, that's great. Hanieh and Henry, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much for having us.
All right, and there it is. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Hanieh and Henry for spending some time with us today and sharing your insights. So Henry has been on the podcast before, so I'm going to link to his previous episodes in the show notes. I strongly encourage you to check them out. We also covered some of Hanieh's research before, so I'm going to link to that too. I'm also going to link to Hanieh's learning module, which focuses on peer learning, which is part of Henry's Coaching Ourselves self-learning platform for managers. So McGill Delve is the official thought leadership podcast of the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University. My name's Eric DeCare. I'm Delve's managing editor, and I was your host today. Professor Saku Montara is Delve's editor-in-chief, and he produced all the original music. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.